Narayana, 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 Narayana. Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Shri Saraswatyai Namaha. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om Tat Sat. In my previous recordings, the last two, I was presenting the idea that this Sat Padartha that we refer to in the Vedantic studies, which we can also call as Brahman, also Atman, used synonymously, is the same as the Tathagata Garbha indicated in the Bauddha Dharma, very specifically the Mahayana Bauddha Dharma. In that Bauddha Dharma, they use this word Sunya, which has caused a lot of commotion because the contemporary literature and the common understanding across the society uses this word self or Atman in two different places. One in the Vedic Dharma and the other in the Bauddha Dharma in two different places. The word is the same, but their understanding and locale of what they are referring to is different. But in the common population, we disregard that context and think that the word is synonymous across these two religious thoughts, which is not correct. And then second point was about how do we get to know the true self or the supreme self or the real self, not the worldly self, not the empirical self, not the phantom self, not the notion of the self, but the self. How do we get to know? So both Vedic Dharma and the Bauddha Dharma have their own prakriyas to inculcate, to generate that understanding, to give that vision. Because this is a matter of such prime necessity, the Chandogya Upanishad, which is said to be one of the oldest available records, perhaps even before some parts of Brihadaranyaka, or maybe the entire Brihadaranyaka. The chapter Chhandogya, Prathama Khanda, wherein the conversation of Shvetaketu with his father Uddalaka is recorded. So I was referring to the first introductory portion of that. I am reading from this book, Mantra Pushpam. So this is one book which people will benefit having, because it gives you all the original Sanskrit print of all the Upanishads and also many stotras and suktas. So if you are looking for a standard literary printed material, the one printed by Ramakrishna Matha, a very great book. We don't have to search many places. So in this one, here the father was asking the son Shvetaketu, Tagum ha pito vacha Shvetaketo yennu somyedam mahamana anuchanamani stabdhosyuta tam adesham aprakshah yenasrutakam srutam bhavati amatam matam avignatam vignatam iti. So father asked him, have you asked your teachers? Tam adesam aprakshah. Have you asked that instruction? What is that instruction? That instruction by which asrutam srutam bhavati. That which is not heard becomes heard. Sruti is referring to, Sruti Shabda is referring to the Veda, or you might say, very specifically here in this context, which is spoken about, which is described, is Srutam. Because only when it is spoken you will be hearing it. So have you asked for that teaching by which unspoken becomes spoken or unheard becomes heard? We know that in the common worldly experience, only when something is spoken, we can hear. And also it can be spoken only about that object to which we can assign some words, and those words should refer to that particular thing alone, so that the hearer can understand and recollect that object correctly. But here he is asking about that instruction where asrutam srutam bhavati. Asrutam means it should be an object which is never heard. Means nobody ever has spoken, indicating that correctly. For example, there is a cow, there is a lion, there is a tiger, there is a table. These objects get spoken about. Such and such is the table. A table looks like this. A cow looks like this. And then having heard being spoken, I can hear it. And then identify, say, oh, this is a cow, because it matches the description that is spoken. But here we are talking about a vastu or a thing which cannot be spoken about. But you want to hear it. So by what means of teaching, by what method of teaching, such an object, such a vastu, such a reality, which cannot be spoken about, will become spoken about? Meaning, to me, when this teaching is given, it is as good as hearing it, even though that vastu itself cannot be spoken about. We heard in the other Upanishads, words cannot reach it, the mind cannot reach it, etc. Meaning, word cannot reach it means that words cannot describe that object completely and correctly, uniquely, in a way that I can recognize. Because I have never ever seen it before, no word can ever reveal it to me. But there is one unique teaching. But there is unique method. That is what Uddalaka is trying to say here. Even though that vastu cannot be spoken about using words, the teaching will reveal it. Similarly, I can only think about those things of which I have a direct sensory experience, or I have heard from someone which I can imagine. But what about that vastu which is never seen by anybody, which cannot be spoken about by anybody? How can it be thought about, contemplated over? But there is one unique teaching with the help of which that which is not meditated upon becomes meditated upon. Means it dawns in our mind. It shines in our mind. Similarly, we can only know about an object which is sensorially experienced, or which is described, or at least which is thought about in the mind, that I come to know. I, the subject, can come to know only in this way. Only when the subject connects with that sensory experience or with that formations in the mind can the subject come to know. But if there is such an object which cannot be known, means which does not become an object of the senses and the mind, then it cannot be known. But what if there is a vastu of that kind? What kind of teaching can make it known to me? So the teacher here, the father, Uddhavaka, means that there is such a teaching where that vastu which is beyond this description of words, mentation, and becoming an object of knowing, can be made, let me correct the sentence. There is such a teaching which will reveal that which is otherwise not possible to grasp by words or the mind or an object of knowing. Still, the teaching can reveal it and I can come to know. Here what is interesting is the father is asking, have you asked? Did you ask your teachers? He did not say, oh, you have come back after 12 years. You say you are such a good student. So did your teachers teach you? He did not say that. Here the father is asking, did you ask your teachers? Tam adesam aprakshya. Has that been asked for? This also means that this teaching will be given only when asked for. It's not going to be distributed in the school just like that. But in this case, Vetakesu doesn't even know that there is such a teaching. How is it possible then for him to ask even though he would have been curious, how would he ever know that there is such a teaching which he can ask his teachers? And he assumed if my teachers knew, they would tell me. But that is not the case. In the case of such a teaching, which reveals that vastu which is beyond the grasp of these jnanendriyas or the mind, or even the vignata, vignatru. So that need to be asked for from the right teachers. So here there is a dichotomy. How is it possible? So in the tradition, the idea is that Ishvaranugraha deva pumsam advaita vasana. So only when there is a desire to know that subject, which is non-dual, of course you will ask, but how would I know? That desire, that interest to come to know, comes from only by Ishvara Anugraha, by the grace of the one self of all, the Ishvara, the Lord. Because this desire to know itself is really uncaused by any human effort. We cannot attribute one reason, one cause for this. But that is the beginning step to make a progress. As if the progress can be made by an individual, even though the desire itself is not originated by individual wish or will. So that idea is to be kept in mind. We do not know what punya, merit, will cause this circumstances where you get to know that there is such a subject. And I think I heard my teachers use the word apatata jnana. It comes somehow. It comes and falls on you. It's not because you go there in search of it. For example, I go to the university, I want to study chemistry, I apply for admission in the chemistry department. Maybe if I want mathematics, I go and apply in the mathematics department. But there is nothing like this because I want to know the one self of all. There is no subject like that listed somewhere that I may opt. At the same time, this is of no use in the worldly sense. But somehow, as Bhagavan Sri Krishna said, after many births, 1 in a million gets this idea that I want to pursue this knowledge. And out of many that pursue, some people make progress and some people succeed. Bahunam janmanamante mam prapadyate. Gnanavan mam prapadyate means interested in knowing, he approaches me. He serves me. So this is one idea that you need to approach the right teacher and ask for the knowledge. By that, what is not spoken about gets revealed to me. What cannot be thought about gets revealed to me. What cannot be known as an object becomes known to me. Because this is the subject of all, the non-dual, in which both known and the knower, the object of meditation as well as the meditator, the object of description as well as to whom it is described, and the processes involved, that is knowing, meditating, hearing, become expressions or manifestations within the same non-dual self. So by knowing that non-dual self, the Triputi means the doer, what is being done, and the doing. Being thought about, thinker, as well as the object thought about. Then the object of knowing, the knower, and the knowing itself. They shine in the light of this one self of all. So knowing the one self of all the manifestations and superimpositions on the one self of all become known to the one self of all which I am. If I were different from the one self of all, then what knowledge can reveal this one self of all to me? Because they are already disconnected. What can connect them again? And moreover, if I have to be knowing, the known becomes inert. Not worth knowing. It is like another tree or a hill or a table or maybe another animal which becomes an object of my knowledge. Similarly, if the Atma were to become an object of my knowledge, then it is useless, such an Atma, because I am superior to that, the knower. So I, as a knower, even though now my knowledge is limited empirically to the space and object and time, I realize that truly my nature is not limited by time or space or any specific object. Such teaching is what Uddalaka pointing to Swetaketu. Yena srutakam srutam bhavati amatam matam Avignatam Vignatamiti. And then there are three descriptions given. One is an example of the clay where different variety of pots made out of it. For lack of words for different shapes, I am just using variety of parts. Clay pots are made, different sizes, maybe depending on the shape. Something may be a pot, something may be a vase, something may be a saucer. But the material is the same clay. You can make many times, you can break them many times, you can mix the clay again make another shape out of it. But when we give the name to them, they are just names. There's nothing more than that. The same shape may have different names in different places, different times. We know that. The names of objects have changed over the centuries or the millennia. So the name is just a name to indicate a particular shape in a particular time or a context. But the material itself, the essential material itself is the same, the clay. They have different, based on the shapes, they may have a different purpose. The place where they are used. Similarly, in the example of the gold and golden ornaments, they have different places where they are adorned. And on different occasions, women may wear them. Different occasions, men may wear them. They may have a higher value. Whether it is a cheaper material like clay or a valued material like gold, it is just a name. Material is essentially the same. Third point, we talk about an implement which shows utility. We take the example of a nail cutter, has certain utility. A knife has a utility. A bucket has a different utility. All of them are made by iron. So utility does not really make it real. What makes it real is what is the essential substance of that. It is the same iron, karshnayasam. So by these examples, the teacher, Father Uddalaka, is asking to disregard shape and name, just looking at them as mere circumstantial. They may offer certain value, certain utility, but essentially the material is the same in all the three different cases. Three different materials are given. But what we need to know, we are not looking for three materials in our real search. In our real search, we are looking for that one God material, one source, of which even in this example, the clay, the gold, the iron themselves have come about. So what is that one which is even the source of them? So in that sense, when we are talking about giving up nama and rupa by three discrete examples of clay, gold and iron, we are trying to see what is samanya in them, what is general in them, what is most common in them, in three different cases. We come up with three different materials. But in our philosophical question, we want to see what is that one material of which this entire variety, Panchabhautika Jagat, has come about. The material world made of this Panchabhutas has come about. That one material That Sat Padartha is what I am interested in. That cannot be spoken by words, because our words were reserved only for certain shapes and properties. But that we want to know. So you need a teaching. That teaching is to be given such a way that that vastu itself cannot be objectified, because that is a subject of all. Means the limited subject, means the subject which has imposed on itself certain limitations, paricheda, needs to overcome that paricheda or limitation and come to know its own virata or sarvavyapakatva or all pervasiveness. So the teacher and the teaching point that to an individual that you are the infinite source. But that infinity word, as we know, itself is limited and created within the mind. Because the word infinite that we know is only referring to, at a lowest level, to the three-dimensional space may become infinite. But what about fourth dimension, 10th dimension? Infinite dimensions. So they become the objects of my concepts. But what is that extra dimension where concept itself becomes a dimension? Because if two-dimensional thing needs to be objectified, I look at from the three dimensions. Now to look at three dimensions, I have created multiple dimensions. Now to put these n dimensions together, that job is done by concept. So how do I visualize that concept? So you cannot be in a concept and visualize a concept. Then it will not be all encompassing. So you need to have a dimension other than this nth dimensional concept, which is knowingness. But that itself becomes a concept, then you need another concept. If that becomes a concept, you need another thing. Because a concept itself is all encompassing, we put as one, the knower is not a concept. A knower is not a concept. So that is the parakashta. That is the finality. How do I know this? When you know this, you will know that is the ultimate, because there are no more doubts left at that point. Vidyate hridaya grandhi chidyante sarva samsaya. So if one is able to come to the beholder of that concept and is able to see that there is nothing else left, because that knower himself is knowledge, the source of knowledge, knowingness, then it becomes certain that this is the final. Sa kashtha sa paragati. That is the maximum place you can reach. Paragati. That is the final place where you can reach. So this is a subjective experience. That I am the subject of all. Remaining everything else is an appearance. So to bring to that, there are two essential entities to be resolved. One is the world, second is this limited I. Limited I that everybody is saying, with referring to their bodies. Both the empirical subject and the empirical object and the empirical objectification all need to be encompassed like an infinity, as we said. Come to a vantage point of drashta, or the subject, pure subject, which is called the one self of all, and see the entire manifestation. And then even cross that, in which it is said, even in the Buddhism they say, the self and no self are non-dual, to that extent. Self and no self are non-dual. That knowledge is only with respect to the self of all, one self of all. So such is the teaching in this one. I wanted to come back to this and clarify some of these points which came to my mind. I'll continue with a few more so that people are able to pick this up and benefit. If these sentences make some sense and you find some help, please do let me know and let me gain from you too. Thank you. Om, Om, Om.